The universe operates on principles we understand: physics, chemistry, the fundamental laws of cause and effect. Warp drive bends space. Transporters convert matter to energy and back again. Even the most exotic phenomena, from subspace anomalies to temporal distortions, follow predictable patterns once properly analyzed. But what happens when something appears that defies every sensor, every theory, every rational explanation? What happens when a being crashes into your reality who shouldn't exist at all? The USS Enterprise D was conducting a routine survey of subspace fluctuations near the Romulan neutral zone when Lieutenant Commander Data's console erupted with warnings. "Captain, I am detecting a massive subspace rupture bearing 27 Mark IV. The dimensional variance is unprecedented." Picard rose from his command chair, tugging his uniform jacket straight. "On screen." The view screen shimmered, revealing a tear in space itself. Not the familiar blue-white of a wormhole, but something wrong. Reality folded inward like crumpled paper, bleeding colors that human eyes weren't meant to process. And through that impossible wound in the fabric of existence, something was coming through. "Sensors are reading an object, sir." Data continued, his fingers dancing across his console. "Velocity 0.75 sublight. Mass approximately 80 kilograms. Composition." He paused, his positronic brain processing data that made no sense. "Unknown. The object appears to be biological, but the readings are contradictory." "Biological?" Riker stepped forward, frowning. "At that velocity? Nothing organic could survive." The rift collapsed with a flash of energy that sent the Enterprise's shields flaring. The object, the person, tumbled through space, trailing what looked like blood frozen instantly in the vacuum. "He's humanoid," Counselor Troy said, her empathic senses suddenly flooded with pain, confusion, and determination so fierce it nearly staggered her. "And he's alive!" Through the view screen, they could see him clearly now. A young man, perhaps 20, wearing a costume of blue and yellow that was torn and scorched. His dark hair drifted around his head in the zero gravity. His eyes were closed. But as the Enterprise's sensors focused on him, those eyes snapped open, and he moved. Not drifted. Moved. With purpose. The young man oriented himself in the vacuum of space as easily as someone standing on solid ground. His head turned, scanning his surroundings with an expression that shifted from combat-ready to utterly bewildered in seconds. He looked at the Enterprise, at the distant stars that were definitely not his stars, and his mouth moved in what was clearly a very emphatic curse. "He's attempting to communicate," Worf reported from Tactical, surprise evident in his voice. "But he is in hard vacuum. This should not be possible. Get a tractor beam on him," Picard ordered. "Bring him to Shuttle Bay 2. Medical team to stand by." "Sir, I do not recommend allowing an unknown entity aboard the ship," Worf protested. "His capabilities are already beyond anything in our database." Picard watched the young man on the screen. He wasn't panicking. Wasn't struggling for air that didn't exist. He simply waited, watching the Enterprise with eyes that held intelligence and wariness in equal measure. This was someone who had been in dangerous situations before. "We're Starfleet, Mr. Worf. Our mission is to explore and understand. Engage tractor beam." The golden beam lanced out, catching the young man in its grip. He tensed, clearly ready to resist, then seemed to think better of it. Smart. He allowed himself to be drawn toward the massive starship, his head tilting as he studied the Enterprise's saucer section with obvious fascination. In Shuttle Bay 2, the away team waited behind a force field as the exterior doors opened and the tractor beam deposited their guest on the deck. Atmosphere flooded in. The young man landed in a crouch, instantly ready for action, his eyes scanning for threats. Dr. Crusher stepped forward, medical tricorder already scanning. Her eyes widened at the readings. "My God! His cellular structure, it's unlike anything I've ever seen. The density, the energy output." She looked up at him. "Can you understand me?" The young man straightened slowly, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. Yeah. I understand you. His voice was hoarse, strained. Look, I don't know where I am or how I got here, but I'm not looking for trouble. My name is Mark Grayson. He glanced down at his torn costume, at the blood, his blood, that stained it. People call me Invincible. Picard stepped forward, the force field between them humming softly. I am Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise. You are not from our universe, I gather? Mark's laugh was bitter. Yeah. I was fighting another Viltrumite, long story. And then something happened. Reality just broke. And now I'm here. He looked around the shuttle bay, at technology that was advanced but nothing like what he was used to. Wherever here is. You are in Federation space. Picard said carefully. The year by our calendar is 2368. If you are indeed from another dimension, then you have my sympathy. We will do everything we can to help you find a way home. 2368? Mark's eyes widened. What? No. That's not. My Earth is in 2022. He ran a hand through his hair, and the gesture was so utterly human, so young and overwhelmed, that Crusher's medical instincts immediately kicked in. Captain, he's injured. Severely. Whatever readings I'm getting, there's trauma throughout his body. He needs medical attention. I'm fine. Mark said automatically. I heal fast. Really fast. But even as he said it, he swayed slightly. Crossing dimensions, it seemed, took more out of him than fighting did. Nevertheless, Picard said gently, I would appreciate it if you would allow Dr. Crusher to examine you. And perhaps we can discuss your situation more thoroughly once we understand what brought you here. He paused. And whether it's possible to send you back. Mark met Picard's eyes, and something in that gaze made the captain reassess his initial judgment. This was no lost child. This was a warrior who had seen things, done things, survived things that would break most beings. But he was also someone who wanted to do the right thing. Okay, Mark said finally. But just so we're clear, I'm cooperating because I want to, not because I have to. I've had enough of people trying to control me. Worf's hand moved fractionally closer to his phaser. Picard simply nodded. In the Federation, Mr. Grayson, we believe in choice. You are a guest here, not a prisoner. For now. He turned to Crusher. Doctor, see to our guest. Commander Data, I want a full analysis of that subspace rupture. And someone find me everything we can about dimensional physics. As the force field dropped and Mark stepped forward, Counselor Troy's eyes widened. She was sensing something from him now, something complicated, nobility mixed with guilt, strength tempered by pain, and underneath it all, a question that burned in his mind. What kind of hero am I without anyone to save? If you want to see more characters enter the Star Trek universe, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. Live long and prosper. The Enterprise had encountered many strange things in its voyages. But Mark Grayson, Invincible, would prove to be something else entirely. Sickbay had never been quite so tense. Dr. Crusher circled Mark with her medical tricorder, recording data that made less sense with each passing moment. Captain Picard stood near the doorway with Commander Riker, observing. Lieutenant Worf positioned himself strategically near the exit, hand resting on his phaser. Data stood at a medical console, his positronic brain processing the incoming stream of biological impossibilities. Mark sat on the biobed, his torn costume revealing skin that should have shown catastrophic injuries but instead displayed only fading bruises. He watched them with the wariness of someone who'd been studied before and hadn't enjoyed the experience. His cellular density is approximately 400 times that of a human, Crusher said, not bothering to hide her astonishment. His bone structure could withstand impacts that would vaporize duranium. And his cells are generating energy through a process I can't even begin to categorize. Yet he appears human, Picard observed. On the surface, yes. But internally? Crusher shook her head. Captain, if I didn't know better, I'd say his body was designed for warfare. Every system optimized for combat, survival, endurance. Mark's jaw tightened. You're not wrong. My father's people, the Viltrumites, they're basically living weapons. Thousands of years of evolution on a planet with gravity and atmospheric pressure that would crush anything else into paste. Fascinating, Data said, looking up from his console. Your species evolved naturally to these specifications? Evolved and refined. Mark's voice carried an edge. Viltrumites don't believe in weakness. Anyone who didn't meet their standards was culled from the population. For centuries. Until only the strongest remained. The sickbay fell silent. Picard exchanged a glance with Riker. They'd encountered warrior cultures before. The Klingon came immediately to mind, but this was something different. This was eugenics elevated to planetary policy. Your father's people, Picard said carefully. Are they a threat to the Federation? Mark laughed, but there was no humor in it. They would be if they were here. But they're not. They're in my dimension, probably wondering where the hell I disappeared to. He looked down at his hands. My dad was sent to Earth as an advanced scout. His job was to weaken our defenses, make us easier to conquer when the Viltrumite Empire eventually showed up. Was? Troy stepped forward, her empathic senses picking up the wave of pain that accompanied that single word. He changed. Or I thought he did. Or maybe he did and then changed back, I don't. Mark stopped himself, visibly forcing his emotions back under control. It's complicated. The point is, I'm not him. I'm not them. I chose to be a hero, not a conqueror. Picard stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. And yet you possess the power to conquer, should you choose to do so. Mark met his eyes. Yeah. I do. That's kind of the whole problem with being a Viltrumite. We're born with enough power to level cities, and we're supposed to believe that makes us better than everyone else. That it gives us the right to rule. He stood from the biobed, and despite his young appearance, his presence suddenly filled the room. I've spent years fighting that ideology. Fighting people who shared my blood and believed that might makes right. A philosophy at odds with Federation principles. Data observed. We believe in diversity, equality, and the right of all sentient beings to self-determination. Sounds nice, Mark said, and he meant it. My Earth has heroes. People like me who use their powers to help instead of dominate. But we don't have anything like this. He gestured vaguely at the Enterprise around them. A whole civilization built on exploration and cooperation? Where I come from, the only time nations work together is when something's about to destroy the planet. Crusher finished her scans and stepped back. You're healing rapidly. The dimensional transition caused some cellular disruption, but your body is adapting. Within a few days you should be at full capacity. Define full capacity, Worf said, his tactical mind already running scenarios. Mark considered the question. I can fly at speeds that break the sound barrier. Survive in the vacuum of space indefinitely. Lift a few thousand tons if I really push it. Take hits from weapons that make nuclear bombs look like firecrackers. He saw their expressions and shrugged. Like I said. Living weapons. Could our shields contain you? Worf asked bluntly. Worf. Picard's voice carried a note of reproach. But Mark appreciated the honesty. I don't know. Probably not if I wanted to leave badly enough. But I'm not your enemy, Commander. I'm just lost. Picard made a decision. Mr. Data, I want you to work with Mr. Grayson to analyze the subspace rupture that brought him here. If there's a way to recreate the phenomenon in a controlled manner, we may be able to return him to his own dimension. Understood, Captain? In the meantime, Picard continued, you are welcome aboard the Enterprise as our guest. However, I must ask that you not leave the ship without authorization. Not out of mistrust, but because your presence, your abilities, could cause diplomatic complications we're not prepared to handle. Mark nodded slowly. Because you have rules about interfering with other civilizations. The Prime Directive, Picard confirmed. Our most sacred principle. We do not interfere with the natural development of other species, particularly those who have not yet achieved warp capability. Even if they're suffering? Even if you could help? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Picard had grappled with this dilemma countless times, and the weight of those decisions showed in his eyes. Even then, he said quietly, because we have learned, through painful experience, that imposing our will on others, even with the best intentions, often causes more harm than good. Mark thought about his father. About Omni-Man's twisted logic that Viltrumites should rule Earth for its own good. About every tyrant who'd ever justified conquest as benevolence. I get it, he said finally. I don't know if I agree, but I get it. That is all I ask, Picard said. Understanding, not necessarily agreement. We are, all of us, products of our experiences. He headed toward the door, then paused. Mr. Grayson, Mark, I have one more question. In your dimension, when you face threats beyond any individual's ability to handle, what do you do? Mark smiled for the first time since arriving. I call for backup. My friends, my team. We handle it together. Then perhaps, Picard said, you'll find we're not so different after all. Welcome aboard the Enterprise. As the captain left with Riker and Troy, Data approached Mark with his characteristic head tilt. I would be interested in discussing the physics of your flight capability. The energy requirements alone suggest principles that... An alarm cut him off. Worf's console lit up with urgent warnings. Captain Picard to the bridge. Worf's voice came through the comm system. We are being hailed by a Klingon battlecruiser. They are demanding to know why we have taken a warrior of such magnitude prisoner. Mark looked at Data. How would they even know I'm here? Data's expression was as close to concerned as an android could manage. The Klingon monitor all activities near the neutral zone. If they observed your arrival and our subsequent actions, they may have misinterpreted the situation. Great, Mark muttered. I've been in this universe for less than an hour, and I'm already causing an international incident. The bridge of the Enterprise hummed with controlled tension as Picard settled into his command chair. On the viewscreen, a Klingon battlecruiser hung in space like a predator sizing up prey, the IKS Kelpo, her weapons powered but not yet charged. The Klingon commander is hailing us again, sir, Worf reported. Captain Kvok is insistent. On screen. The viewscreen flickered to reveal a Klingon commander whose scarred face and iron-gray hair spoke of decades of combat. Kvok's eyes burned with an intensity that made even Worf straighten unconsciously. Captain Picard? Kvok's voice rumbled like distant thunder. We detected a warrior's arrival through a spatial tear. We watched as you captured him in your tractor beam and imprisoned him on your vessel. This is not the action of honorable allies. Captain Kvok, I assure you there has been a misunderstanding. Our guest came willingly. Guest? Kvok leaned forward, his expression skeptical. A warrior who survives the void of space without protection? Who moves as if flight itself bends to his will? You would have us believe such a being surrendered to your Federation weakness? Picard felt the conversation slipping away from him. If you would allow me to explain. I would speak with this warrior. Kvok interrupted. Let him declare his status with his own voice. Or are you afraid of what he might say? Mark's voice crackled over the comm system before Picard could respond. Captain, I'm on my way to the bridge. Might as well clear this up face to face. Mr. Grayson, that's not... But the comm had already cut off. Riker glanced at the turbolift. Sir, should we stop him? With what, number one? Picard asked dryly. According to Dr. Crusher, Mr. Grayson could tear through our security force fields like tissue paper if he chose to. The turbolift doors opened. Mark stepped onto the bridge, his costume still torn and blood-stained, but his bearing radiating confidence. Every eye turned to him. Worf's hand moved toward his phaser instinctively, then stopped. Something in the young man's posture, in the way he carried himself, spoke to the Klingons' warrior instincts. Mark took in the bridge with a quick, analytical sweep, escape routes, tactical positions, crew capabilities, before focusing on the view screen. "You the Klingon captain who thinks I'm a prisoner?" Kvak's eyes widened fractionally, the only sign of his surprise. "You are aboard a Federation vessel of your own will?" "Yeah. They offered to help me get home. Seemed like a better option than drifting through space trying to figure out where the hell I am." Mark crossed his arms. "I'm Mark Grayson. Invincible. And I'm nobody's prisoner unless they're strong enough to make me one." A slow smile spread across Kvak's face. "Spoken like a true warrior. Tell me, Invincible, the Federation detected your arrival through a dimensional rupture. What manner of battle were you engaged in that tore reality itself?" "Fighting another Viltrumite," Mark said flatly. "My people, my father's people, they're conquerors. Believe that strength gives them the right to dominate everyone else. I was stopping one from enslaving a planet when something went wrong and I ended up here." Kvak's expression shifted from skepticism to fascination. "A warrior who opposes his own kind's conquest. This is a tale worthy of song. Your people must be formidable if they can breach the barriers between dimensions during combat." "Formidable," Mark repeated, his voice carrying an edge. "That's one word for it. Genocidal is another. Viltrumites wiped out most of their own population to create a pure warrior race. Anyone who wasn't strong enough or loyal enough was eliminated." The bridge fell silent. Even Kvak seemed to reappraise the young man before him. "And yet you stand against them," Kvak said slowly. "Alone?" "Not alone. I have allies back home. A team. Friends." Mark's expression hardened. "We stop people, Viltrumites or otherwise, who think power means they get to decide how everyone else lives." Worf stepped forward slightly. "You fight for honor, not glory." Mark looked at the Klingon tactical officer, seeing something in him that resonated. "I fight because it's the right thing to do. Because I can, so I should. The glory, if that's what you want to call it, doesn't really matter." "It matters," Worf said firmly. "A warrior's reputation is forged in the fires of battle. To face impossible odds and emerge victorious is the highest honor. In Klingon culture, perhaps," Picard interjected carefully. "But Mr. Grayson comes from a different tradition." Kvak laughed, a booming sound that filled the bridge. "Captain Picard, your Federation has many virtues, but understanding warriors is not among them. This young one carries himself as one born to combat. I can see it in his eyes, in his stance. He is no diplomat hiding behind words." "With respect, Captain Kvak," Mark said, his tone level but firm. "I'm not interested in proving myself to you or anyone else. I've spent enough time fighting to know that real strength isn't about domination or reputation. It's about protecting people who can't protect themselves." "A noble sentiment," Kvak said, his smile fading. "But naive. The galaxy is not kind to those who fight only for others. Power without ambition withers. Strength without conquest is wasted. That's where you're wrong." Mark's voice carried absolute conviction. "The strongest person I ever knew used his power to help people. To inspire them. To show them what they could become. That's not wasted. That's the whole point." Kvak studied Mark for a long moment, then turned his attention to Picard. "Captain, I withdraw my concern about your prisoner. Clearly, this warrior has chosen to honor you with his presence." He paused. "However, I would make a proposal. The House of Kvak always seeks warriors of exceptional ability. Invincible, you would be welcomed among us. We could teach you the ways of true honor, how to channel your strength toward glory that will echo through the ages." "I appreciate the offer," Mark said, "but I'm not looking to join anyone's house or empire. I just want to find a way home." "A pity." Kvak's expression showed genuine disappointment. "Should you reconsider, the Klingon Empire honors strength above all else. Unlike the Federation, we do not shackle our warriors with rules that forbid them from acting when action is required. Picard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The Prime Directive is not a shackle, Captain Kvok. It is a recognition that interfering with other cultures, however well-intentioned, often leads to catastrophe. And yet civilizations suffer while you watch. Kvok countered. Your principles are admirable, Picard, but they are the luxury of those who have already achieved greatness. What of those still struggling? Mark looked between the two captains, seeing the fundamental divide between their philosophies. The Klingon way. Direct action, honor through battle, strength wielded without apology. The Federation way, restraint, diplomacy, respect for other cultures, autonomy even when it meant standing by while injustice occurred. And somewhere in the middle, his own way. The hero's way. Using power to help, but on whose terms? Picard's ready room was a study in controlled elegance. Books lining shelves, artifacts from distant worlds, and a window showing the stars beyond. Mark stood near the desk, feeling oddly out of place in his torn costume among such refinement. Picard poured 2 glasses of water from a carafe, offering one to Mark. I suspect you've had quite enough excitement for your first day in our universe. Mark accepted the glass. That Klingon captain, Kvok, he wasn't wrong about everything he said. Oh? Picard settled into his chair, gesturing for Mark to sit. Which parts specifically? Mark remained standing. The part about the Federation watching while people suffer. I've been here less than 2 hours and I've already heard about this Prime Directive thing twice. You really just stand by. Even when you could help? The Prime Directive is not about apathy, Mr. Grayson. It's about recognizing that our intervention, however well-meaning, can do more harm than good. We have seen entire civilizations destroyed by contact with more advanced species. Cultural contamination that erased unique perspectives from the galaxy forever. But you're talking about sharing technology or changing their society. Mark argued. What about just stopping the bad guys? If someone's invading a planet, conquering people, killing innocents, you'd really just let it happen? Picard's expression grew complicated. If both parties are warp-capable civilizations, we can offer assistance. But if one is pre-warp, you watch. Mark's voice carried disbelief. You have the power to save lives and you choose not to because of a rule. Because of wisdom earned through painful mistakes. Picard corrected gently. The Federation once believed as you do. That our advanced knowledge gave us the responsibility, even the right, to guide other species. Do you know what happened? Mark shook his head. We created dependencies. Cultures that abandoned their own development to worship us as gods. Civilizations that collapsed when we inevitably had to leave. Wars fought over Federation technology that we had introduced. Picard stood, moving to the window. We learned that every species must find its own path. That true progress cannot be imposed from outside, no matter how benevolent the intention. That's... Mark stopped himself, trying to articulate the wrongness he felt. On my Earth, if I see someone in danger and I don't help because it might mess up some grand plan, I'm not a hero. I'm a coward hiding behind philosophy. Are you? Picard turned to face him. Or are you exercising wisdom? Tell me, when you fight these Viltrumites, these conquerors from your dimension, what happens to the civilizations caught in the crossfire? Mark flinched. He thought of the city's damage during his fights. The casualties that happened even when he was trying to protect people. The infrastructure destroyed, the economies disrupted, the psychological trauma inflicted on populations who watched Titans battle overhead. I do my best to minimize collateral damage, he said quietly. I'm certain you do. But damage still occurs, doesn't it? Because your very presence, your power, changes the fundamental dynamic of any situation you enter. You become the most important factor, the decisive variable. And the people you're trying to save? They become spectators to their own rescue. So what, I should just not help? Let people die because saving them might make them dependent on being saved? I'm not suggesting inaction, Picard said carefully. I'm suggesting that there are different ways to help. Ways that empower rather than overshadow. Ways that preserve dignity and agency rather than creating children who wait for gods to solve their problems. Mark set down his glass, his frustration evident. Captain, with respect, you're talking about theory. Philosophy. I'm talking about people bleeding, dying, suffering right now. You can dress it up with as many principles as you want, but at the end of the day, you're choosing to let it happen when you could stop it. Yes, Picard said simply. Sometimes I am. And I carry the weight of those choices every day. But I have also seen what happens when powerful beings decide they know better than entire civilizations. I have seen the chaos that follows. The Prime Directive exists because we learned, at tremendous cost, that there are things worse than suffering. And one of them is losing the right to determine your own fate. The two men stood in silence, neither willing to concede the point. Finally, Mark spoke. My father said something similar once. That Earth needed to be conquered for its own good. That humans were too chaotic, too self-destructive, and that Viltrumite rule would save us from ourselves. He believed it completely. Thought he was doing us a favor. Picard's eyes sharpened. And what did you say to him? I said he was wrong. That people have the right to make their own mistakes, to chart their own course, even if it's messy and chaotic and sometimes tragic. That freedom matters more than safety. Mark met Picard's gaze. But here's the thing, he was trying to conquer us. I'm talking about defending people who are already free from those who take that freedom away. A meaningful distinction, Picard acknowledged. And one we recognize. The Federation will defend its members from external threats. We will offer aid when requested by warp-capable civilizations. What we will not do is impose our values on those who have not yet achieved sufficient technological development to encounter us on roughly equal footing. And if they never achieve it? If they're wiped out before they get the chance? Then that is a tragedy we must accept as the price of respecting their sovereignty. Mark shook his head. I don't know if I can accept that. I wouldn't expect you to. Not immediately. Picard returned to his desk. You come from a universe where individual heroes can make a difference. Where power wielded responsibly can save the day. Our universe operates on different principles. Here, it's not about individual heroism but collective effort. Not about imposing solutions but fostering cooperation. Sounds like you're trying to convince me the Klingon was right. That the Federation ties your hands with its rules. The Klingon have their own wisdom, Picard admitted. And their own blind spots. They value honor and directness, which are admirable traits. But they also perpetuate cycles of violence that the Federation has worked to transcend. Kvok sees our restraint as weakness. I see Klingon directness as occasionally necessary but often short-sighted. The comm system chirped. Bridge to Captain Picard. Sir, we're detecting a distress signal from a transport vessel near the Romulan border. They report being pursued by unknown attackers. Picard tapped his comm badge. On my way. He looked at Mark. You're welcome to return to the bridge if you wish. But I ask that you observe only. This is a Federation matter. Mark followed Picard out of the ready room, his mind churning. In his universe, a distress call meant immediate action. Here, apparently, it meant careful consideration of protocols and jurisdictions. On the bridge, Data was already analyzing the signal. Captain, the transport is the civilian freighter Kara. Registry shows it as an independent trader operating near the neutral zone. They are being pursued by 3 vessels matching Romulan scout ship configurations. The Romulans are attacking a civilian vessel? Riker asked. Not attacking, Commander, Data corrected. Pursuing. The Kara is attempting to flee into Federation space. The Romulan vessels are maintaining pursuit but have not fired weapons. Yet, Worf added darkly. Mark stepped closer to the view screen, watching the tactical display. 3 ships chasing 1. Simple math. Simple solution. Options number 1? Picard asked. We could intercept, position ourselves between the Romulans and the freighter. Make it clear they'd have to go through us to continue pursuit, which risks escalating into armed conflict with the Romulan Star Empire. Picard noted. Mr. Data, what is the Kara-S cargo manifest? According to their registry, medical supplies bound for Federation Colony Septimus 3. However, I am detecting anomalous energy signatures from their hold that are inconsistent with medical supplies. Picard's expression hardened. Mr. Worf, hail the Kara. I want to know exactly what they're carrying and why the Romulans want it badly enough to risk violating Federation space. Mark watched the crew work, saw the measured approach, the careful consideration of every variable. And he thought about how much faster this would be if someone just flew over there and stopped the Romulan ships. How much simpler heroism was when you didn't have to worry about diplomatic consequences. The Kara-S captain appeared on the view screen, a Balian male with the characteristic blue skin of his species, but his usual jovial demeanor was replaced by obvious panic. Enterprise, thank the prophets! The Romulans appeared out of nowhere and demanded we surrender our cargo. We refused and ran, but they're gaining. You have to help us. Captain Thex, Picard said calmly. Our sensors indicate your cargo manifest is inaccurate. What exactly are you transporting? Thex's expression flickered, just for a moment, and Mark caught it. Guilt. The freighter captain was lying. Medical supplies as filed. Dermal regenerators, surgical equipment, vaccine cultures for the colony. Captain, Data interrupted. I am now detecting weapons-grade plasma conduits in your hold. Specifically, Romulan military specifications. The silence on the bridge was deafening. Thex's face crumpled. Okay, yes, fine. I'm transporting salvage. Old Romulan equipment from a derelict near the neutral zone. It's not illegal to salvage abandoned property in neutral space. It is when the property belongs to the Romulan Star Empire. Worf growled. And they clearly do not consider it abandoned. Mr. Data? Picard said, his voice hardening. Are those conduits still active? Affirmative, Captain. The plasma signatures suggest they were recently removed from a functioning vessel. If Captain Thex is claiming salvage rights, the timeline does not support his story. Mark watched Picard's face change as the realization set in. This wasn't a rescue. This was a smuggler caught with stolen military technology, running to Federation space for protection. Captain Thex, Picard said, you will stop your vessel immediately and prepare to be boarded. We will conduct a full inspection of your cargo and determine. No! You don't understand, they'll kill me! The Romulans don't take prisoners when it comes to stolen military secrets. Please, Captain, I'm a Federation citizen. You have to protect me. Riker leaned in. Sir, he's not wrong. If we turn him over to the Romulans, they'll execute him. And if we shield him, we're harboring a thief who stole military technology from a foreign power. Picard countered. The diplomatic ramifications. Are we seriously having this conversation? Mark's voice cut through the debate. Every head turned toward him. There are people in danger and we're worried about diplomatic ramifications. Mr. Grayson, Picard said firmly, this is not a simple situation. Seems pretty simple to me. Those Romulan ships are about to catch him. You position the Enterprise between them, tell the Romulans to back off, and figure out the legal stuff later when everyone's still alive. The Kara captain is a criminal. Worf stated. He stole from the Romulans and is using Federation space as a shield. We should not reward such behavior. So let him die, Mark challenged. Let him face the consequences of his actions, Worf corrected. Honor demands we save lives first and sort out justice later, Mark shot back. What good is honor if you're dead? Troy stepped forward, her empathic abilities clearly picking up the escalating tension. Captain, the Romulans are hailing us. On screen. The Romulan commander who appeared was female, her features sharp and her eyes calculating. Commander Seattle of the Romulan warbird Valdor. Her expression showed the barely controlled fury of someone who'd been chasing prey for hours. Captain Picard? The vessel you are no doubt considering protecting is carrying stolen Romulan military property. Technology that, in the wrong hands, could compromise our defensive capabilities. We demand you stand aside and allow us to recover our property and the thief who took it. Commander Seattle, the Kalra is attempting to reach Federation space. Once there, it falls under our jurisdiction. The Kalra is a thief's vessel. Seattle interrupted. Its captain murdered 3 Romulan engineers and stole classified technology from a military installation. This is not a salvage operation. It is a theft of state secrets followed by murder. Would the Federation truly harbor such a criminal? Mark saw Picard's expression shift. Murder changed the equation. Captain Thex? Picard said sharply, turning to the still open channel with the freighter. Is this true? Did you kill Romulan personnel? Thex's silence was answer enough. They were guards, he finally stammered. I didn't have a choice. They were going to stop me, and I needed. The buyers offered so much latinum, you don't understand. I have debts, families depending on me. You are a murderer, Worf said flatly. Data's console beeped urgently. Captain, the Romulan vessels have achieved weapons lock on the Kalra. They are preparing to fire. Shields up, Picard ordered. Position us between the Romulans and the freighter. Mr. Worf, hail Commander Seattle. Mark felt a flash of surprise. Picard was protecting the murderer? Commander Seattle, Picard said as her face reappeared on the screen. I cannot allow you to destroy that vessel while we are still determining the facts of this situation. I propose we take Captain Thex and his cargo into custody, conduct a full investigation, and if your claims prove accurate, turn him over to Romulan authorities through proper diplomatic channels. Seattle's laugh was cold. You would lecture me on proper channels while protecting a murderer of my people? The Romulan Star Empire does not require the Federation's permission to administer justice. Stand aside, Picard, or we will consider this an act of war. You're bluffing, Riker said quietly to Picard. 3 scout ships against the Enterprise? They wouldn't risk it. Perhaps, Picard replied. Or perhaps Commander Seattle has reinforcements we cannot detect. The Romulans did not build an empire through reckless bluffs. Mark watched the tactical display. The Romulan ships were maneuvering, trying to get a clear shot at the freighter despite the Enterprise's position. The Kalra was still running, now entering Federation space. Captain Thex has crossed into Federation territory, Data reported. By treaty law, he is now under our protection. A technicality, Seattle hissed. He committed his crimes in Romulan space. He murdered Romulan citizens. You hide behind treaties while sheltering killers. And that's when Mark saw it. Saw the complexity Picard had been trying to explain. Thex was a murderer and a thief. But he was also a Federation citizen who'd made it to Federation space. The Romulans had a legitimate grievance. But they were also using this as an excuse to violate Federation sovereignty. And the whole situation balanced on a knife's edge between justice and war. This is wrong, Mark said, not quite believing what he was seeing. All of this. You're protecting a murderer because of where he happens to be standing? I'm protecting Federation law, Picard said quietly. And attempting to prevent a war that would kill thousands. Mr. Worf, inform Commander Seattle that Captain Thex will be taken into custody by Starfleet security. We will conduct a full investigation and, if warranted, extradite him through proper channels. The stolen technology will be returned to the Romulan Star Empire immediately. Unacceptable, Seattle said. We will not wait for your Federation bureaucracy to decide whether murder is a crime. We will have our justice now. The Romulan ships charged weapons. Red alert, Picard ordered. All hands to battle stations. The Enterprise's bridge bathed in red alert lighting as alarms pulsed through the air. Mark felt his muscles tense involuntarily, combat instincts honed through years of fighting screaming at him to act. Romulan vessels are powering disruptors. Worf reported, his voice steady despite the tension. They are targeting the Kara. Evasive maneuvers, Picard ordered. Keep us between them and the freighter. Mr. Worf, forward shields to maximum. The Enterprise shifted, her massive bulk repositioning with surprising grace. The Romulan ships spread out, trying to flank around the Federation starship. Mark watched the tactical display, calculating trajectories and attack vectors automatically. 3 against 1. The Enterprise was bigger, more powerful, but the Romulans were faster, more maneuverable. Captain, Data said, his fingers flying across his console. I am detecting a subspace distortion forming approximately 15,000 kilometers to our stern. Configuration matches a Romulan warbird decloaking sequence. Riker swore under his breath. Reinforcements. She wasn't bluffing. The distortion resolved into a massive vessel, the Valdor, a Deredix-class warbird that dwarfed even the Enterprise. Its green hull plating seemed to absorb light, giving it a predatory appearance that matched its reputation. Incoming transmission, Worf announced. Commander Seath's face filled the view screen once more, this time from the warbird's bridge. Her expression held grim satisfaction. Captain Picard, you have 5 minutes to surrender the Murdereth X and the stolen technology, or we will consider the Enterprise to be an accomplice to his crimes. We will open fire and destroy both vessels. Commander, Picard said, his voice admirably calm. You are threatening to attack a Federation starship in Federation space. This is an act of war. No, Captain. This is justice. You made it an act of war the moment you chose to protect a killer of Romulans. Seath leaned forward. 5 minutes. Choose wisely. The transmission ended. Sir, Riker said urgently, even the Enterprise can't take on a warbird and 3 scout ships simultaneously. If they coordinate their fire. I'm aware of the tactical situation, number 1. Picard stood, moving to the view screen as if proximity would somehow reveal a solution. Mr. Data options? We could attempt to negotiate a compromise. Offer to hold Captain Thex in Federation custody pending a joint trial with Romulan observers. The stolen technology could be returned immediately as a gesture of good faith. They won't accept, Worf said flatly. The commander wants blood. Romulan justice is swift and absolute. They view our legal system as weakness. Mark couldn't stay silent any longer. This is insane. You're going to let people die over legal jurisdiction? Picard turned to face him, and Mark saw something in the captain's eyes he hadn't expected, shared frustration. What would you have me do, Mr. Grayson? Surrender a Federation citizen to summary execution? Or start a war that could claim millions of lives? I'd stop those ships from firing in the first place, Mark said, moving closer to the view screen. You're all acting like these are the only 2 choices. Surrender or fight. What about a third option? Which is? Mark gestured at himself. Me. I fly out there, disable their weapons systems without destroying the ships, and everyone lives to argue about jurisdiction another day. The bridge fell silent. Absolutely not, Picard said firmly. Mr. Grayson, you are not Starfleet. This is not your fight. And introducing an unknown variable of your power level into an already volatile situation could escalate matters beyond. Beyond what? Mark interrupted. Beyond a shooting war? Because that's about 4 minutes away from happening anyway. He's not wrong, Captain, Riker said quietly. If Mr. Grayson could neutralize their weapons without casualties. No. Picard's voice carried absolute authority. We do not unleash weapons we cannot control. Mr. Grayson's abilities are formidable, but he is unfamiliar with Romulan technology, with their tactical responses, with the delicate balance of power in this region. One miscalculation could trigger the very war we're trying to prevent. So instead you'll just let it happen. Mark's voice rose. You'll stand here debating philosophy while those ships open fire? I will exhaust every diplomatic option before resorting to violence. Picard countered. That is what separates us from 3 minutes, Captain. Worf interrupted. Mark felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd been in situations like this before. Moments where talking ended and action began. The difference was, back home, he'd had the freedom to act. Here, he was being asked to be a bystander while people, even a murderer like Thex, died for principles he didn't fully understand. Troy stepped forward, her empathic senses clearly overwhelmed. Captain, I'm sensing. She looked at Mark. Mr. Grayson, your emotions are, you need to calm down. Whatever you're considering. I'm considering whether I can live with myself if I stand here and do nothing, Mark said honestly. Captain, Data spoke up. I may have a solution. If we transfer the stolen Romulan technology to a shuttle and launch it toward the Valdor as a good faith gesture while simultaneously broadcasting Captain Thex's full confession and our guarantee of his detention pending proper extradition procedures, we might. 2 minutes, Worf said. Do it, Picard ordered. Mr. Data, prepare the transfer. Lieutenant, broadcast the following message on all Romulan frequencies. Mark watched the crews spring into coordinated action. Data's fingers flew across his console, routing the stolen technology to Shuttle Bay 2. Worf transmitted Picard's carefully worded message, an acknowledgement of Romulan grievances, a promise of justice, an appeal to reason over vengeance. And through it all, the countdown continued. 1 minute 30 seconds. Shuttle launched, Captain, Data reported. Romulan technology aboard, trajectory plotted to intercept the Valdor. 1 minute. No response from Commander Seatle, Worf said, his hand hovering over tactical controls. 45 seconds. Mark moved toward the turbolift. Picard's head snapped around. Mr. Grayson, return to your position. I'm not Starfleet, remember? Mark said, his hand on the turbolift door. Which means I'm not bound by your Prime Directive or your regulations or your diplomatic protocols. If you interfere, people live, Mark finished. That's what happens if I interfere. Maybe there are consequences. Maybe the Romulans get angry. Maybe it causes problems down the line. But nobody dies today. 30 seconds. Captain. A new voice crackled over the comm system. Not Seatle. Male. Older. This is Sub-Commander Tomalak of the Romulan Imperial Fleet. We have been monitoring this situation. Another ship decloaked, this one behind the Romulan formation. Larger than the Valdor. More weapons. The tactical display was now showing overwhelming Romulan superiority. Mark's hand tightened on the turbolift door. Commander Seatle. Tomalak's voice continued. You were authorized to pursue and recover stolen technology. You were not authorized to provoke armed conflict with the Federation over a single criminal. Stand down. The bridge held its collective breath. Sub-Commander. Seatle's voice came back, tight with barely controlled fury. The murderer will face justice through proper channels, as the Federation has promised. We have recovered our technology. The diplomatic cost of destroying a Federation starship over one criminal's life is not acceptable. Power down your weapons. 20 seconds. 15. 10. The red indicators on Worf's tactical display shifted to yellow. The Romulan ships were standing down. Commander Seatle acknowledges the order, Worf reported, relief evident despite his controlled tone. Romulan weapons powering down. Picard let out a breath so Mark almost missed it. Stand down from red alert. Mr. Worf, hail Sub-Commander Tomalak. The Romulan who appeared on screen was older, his face lined with the kind of cunning that came from decades of navigating political minefields. Captain Picard? We seem to find ourselves in these situations rather frequently. Sub-Commander. Your timing is, as always, impeccable. The Romulan Star Empire has no desire for war with the Federation. Not over a petty thief, regardless of Commander Seatle's personal feelings about Romulan honor. Tomalak's expression hardened. However, we will expect Captain Thex to be delivered to the neutral zone outpost within 48 hours for trial. The evidence of his crimes is clear. We trust the Federation will honor its commitment to justice. You have my word, Picard said. Captain Thex will face trial for his crimes under joint Federation-Romulan jurisdiction. Tomalak nodded slowly. Then this matter is settled. For now. His eyes shifted, scanning the Enterprise bridge, and for just a moment, they locked onto Mark. The Romulan's expression flickered, curiosity, calculation, assessment. Captain, I notice you have an unfamiliar presence on your bridge. A new crew member, perhaps? I guess, Picard said carefully. Temporarily aboard while we resolve certain technical matters. How intriguing. Tomalak's smile didn't reach his eyes. The Romulan Star Empire always takes interest in new variables in the balance of power. Perhaps we will speak again soon, Captain. About many things. The transmission ended. Mark released his grip on the turbolift door, stepping back onto the bridge. His heart was still racing, adrenaline flooding his system with nowhere to go. You see, Mr. Grayson, Picard said quietly, turning to face him. Diplomacy takes time. But it can achieve what violence cannot, resolution without bloodshed. This time, Mark said. What about next time? What if Tomalak hadn't shown up? What if those ships had opened fire? Then we would have defended ourselves, Picard replied. But we would have done so only after exhausting every alternative. That is the difference between reactive violence and principled action. Mark shook his head. I don't know if I can operate like this. Back home, when someone's in danger, you help them. You don't calculate political costs or worry about diplomatic precedent. You just act. And here, Picard said not unkindly, we've learned that just acting often creates more problems than it solves. Your instincts are noble, Mr. Grayson. But instinct without wisdom can be as destructive as malice with power. Before Mark could respond, Data spoke up. Captain, I am receiving a coded transmission. Source appears to be from within Federation space, but the encryption is unusual. Not standard Starfleet protocols. Can you decode it? Riker asked. Already done, sir. It is addressed specifically to the one called Invincible. The message reads, Your arrival has not gone unnoticed. There are those who understand that power should not be restrained by outdated principles. If you wish to make a real difference in this universe, contact Section 31. The bridge fell silent once more. Section 31? Mark asked. Who are they? The look that passed between Picard, Riker, and Worf told him everything he needed to know. Whoever Section 31 was, they represented something the Enterprise crew deeply distrusted. A conversation for another time, Picard said, his jaw tight. Mr. Data, delete that message. Mr. Grayson, I think it's time we had a more comprehensive discussion about the various factions you may encounter in the Federation, some of which do not share our commitment to transparent ethics. Mark nodded slowly, but his mind was already turning over the implications. In his universe, heroes and villains were usually easy to identify. Here, it seemed, the lines were far more blurred. And something told him that was about to become very relevant very quickly. The conference room was quieter than the bridge, but the tension hadn't diminished. Picard sat at the head of the table, with Riker and Data flanking him. Worf stood near the door, his posture suggesting he'd rather be anywhere else. Mark sat across from them, feeling like he was being called to the principal's office. Section 31. Picard began, his distaste for the words evident. Is an organization that claims to protect the Federation through means that violate everything the Federation stands for. A secret intelligence agency, Riker elaborated. Operating without oversight, without accountability. They believe the ends justify the means, no matter how morally reprehensible those means might be. They are not officially acknowledged by Starfleet Command, Data added. Yet they possess resources, intelligence networks, and technology that suggest either covert support from within the Federation hierarchy or autonomous capabilities far exceeding any sanctioned organization. Mark leaned back in his chair. So they're like Black Ops. Wet work specialists. The people who do the dirty jobs so everyone else can keep their hands clean. An apt, if cynical, description, Picard said. They justify their actions by claiming to prevent larger catastrophes. Assassination of political leaders to prevent wars. Biological weapons deployed against hostile species. Manipulation of entire civilizations to serve Federation interests. All in the name of security. And you don't approve. I find their very existence antithetical to Federation principles, Picard said firmly. The moment we abandon our ethics for expedience, we become no better than the threats we claim to oppose. Section 31 represents everything the Federation should never be. Power without accountability, action without moral consideration. Worf spoke up, his voice a low rumble. They are cowards who hide in shadows and strike without honor. If their cause was just, they would not need to operate in secrecy. Mark thought about his own world. About the gray areas in heroism. About times he'd been tempted to cross lines because the alternative seemed worse. What if they're right, though? What if there are threats that can't be stopped by diplomacy and rules? Then we adapt our methods while maintaining our principles, Picard replied. The Federation has faced extinction-level threats before, the Borg, the Dominion, countless others. We survived not by becoming monsters to fight monsters, but by remaining true to what we believe. The moment we sacrifice our values for survival, we lose what makes survival worthwhile. That's easy to say when you're not the one making the hard choices, Mark countered. I've fought people, Viltrumites, who would have destroyed Earth if someone hadn't stopped them. Sometimes talking isn't enough. I agree, Picard said, surprising him. Sometimes force is necessary. The difference is in how we apply that force and whether we do so as a last resort or a first option. Section 31 chooses the latter, and they do it without democratic oversight or ethical constraints. Riker leaned forward. Mark, they contacted you for a reason. You're powerful, you're not bound by Starfleet regulations, and you've already expressed frustration with our Prime Directive. You're exactly the kind of asset they'd want to recruit. And what do they want me to do? Kill people for them? Possibly, Data said. Their operations have included assassination, sabotage, and coercion. With your capabilities, you could eliminate targets that would be impossible for normal operatives to approach. You could interfere in developing civilizations without leaving evidence of Federation involvement. You could be their perfect weapon, powerful enough to change outcomes, disconnected enough to provide plausible deniability. Mark felt a chill run through him. He'd been used before. Manipulated by people who claimed to have good intentions. His father had tried to turn him into a tool for Viltrumite conquest. He'd sworn he'd never let anyone use him like that again. I'm not interested in being anyone's weapon, he said flatly. I'm glad to hear it, Picard said. But I need you to understand. Section 31 won't simply accept rejection. They're persistent, and they're patient. They'll wait for a moment when you're vulnerable, when you've seen something that makes you question Federation principles, and they'll offer you a way to make a real difference, as their message suggested. Let them try, Mark said. I didn't come to this universe to get recruited by shadowy organizations. No, you came here by accident, Riker pointed out. Which means you're adrift. No mission, no purpose, no team. Section 31 specializes in finding people in exactly that position and giving them purpose. Direction. A way to feel like they're making a difference. The words hit harder than Mark wanted to admit. He was adrift. Back home, he'd been part of something, the Guardians of the Globe, his family, his mission to protect Earth. Here, he was a stranger in a strange universe, watching people operate under rules that felt wrong to every instinct he had. Captain, Data said suddenly, I am detecting an encrypted subspace transmission originating from within the ship. The encryption matches the pattern from the Section 31 message. Source? Picard demanded. Deck 12, Section 7. The transmission lasted only 2.3 seconds before terminating. I am unable to determine the recipient or content due to the encryption level. Worf's hand moved to his phaser. There is a Section 31 operative aboard the Enterprise. Or someone communicating with them, Riker said grimly. Captain, we need to lock down that section and search every compartment. Picard stood, his expression hardening. Make it so, but discreetly. If there is an operative aboard, I don't want them knowing we're looking until we have them in custody. He turned to Mark. Mr. Grayson, I'm going to ask you to remain in your quarters for the time being. I understand you're not Starfleet, but you don't want an unpredictable variable running around while you're hunting a spy. Mark finished. I get it. But just so we're clear, if this Section 31 tries to contact me directly, I'm not going to play nice. I wouldn't expect you to, Picard said. But I would ask that you inform me immediately if they do. Section 31 is a Federation problem. We need to handle it as such. Mark stood. I'll stay out of your way. For now. As he left the conference room, Worf fell into step beside him. The Klingon tactical officer's presence was both intimidating and, strangely, reassuring. You do not trust easily, Worf observed as they walked toward the turbolift. Neither do you, Mark replied. No. Trust must be earned through honor and action. Worf studied him with dark, penetrating eyes. You fought well today. Not with weapons, but with restraint. That requires a different kind of strength. Didn't feel like strength. Felt like being handcuffed while watching other people almost start a war. Yet you did not break those handcuffs. Worf pointed out. You could have. Your power would have allowed it. But you respected Captain Picard's authority even when you disagreed with his methods. That is honor. Mark hadn't thought of it that way. On my world, we have a saying, with great power comes great responsibility. It means that if you can help, you should. But here, it seems like responsibility means not helping sometimes. I don't know how to reconcile that. Neither do I. Worf admitted. The Klingon way is direct. If there is an enemy, you face them in combat. If there is injustice, you correct it with strength. The Federation way. He paused, searching for words. It is more complex. Sometimes frustratingly so. But I have learned that complexity is not always weakness. They reached the turbolift. As the doors opened, Worf placed a hand on Mark's shoulder, a gesture of respect that Mark recognized even across cultural boundaries. You are a warrior, Worf said. I see it in you. But being a warrior is not only about fighting. It is about knowing when to fight, and when to stand down. Captain Picard understands this better than anyone I have known. The turbolift doors closed, leaving Mark alone with his thoughts as the car descended toward guest quarters on Deck 8. Worf's words echoed in his mind. In his universe, he defined himself through action. Through using his power to make a difference. Here, making a difference seemed to require just as much inaction as action, and it went against every heroic instinct he'd developed. The turbolift stopped. The doors opened. Standing in the corridor outside was a human woman Mark hadn't seen before. She wore a civilian outfit, nondescript, forgettable, but her eyes were sharp and calculating. She smiled, and it didn't reach those eyes. Mr. Grayson, I was hoping we'd have a chance to talk. My name is Sloan. I work for an organization that could use someone with your unique talents. Mark's hands clenched into fists. Section 31. Among other designations. Sloan stepped closer, unafraid. I watched you on the bridge today. Saw you struggling with the choice between action and obedience. Between saving lives and following rules. That kind of moral clarity is rare. Valuable. I'm not interested. You say that now. But you've been in this universe for less than a day, and you're already chafing against Federation restrictions. The Prime Directive. The endless debates. The diplomatic delays while people suffer and die. Sloane's voice was smooth, persuasive. What happens when you witness real atrocities? When you see civilizations enslaved, innocents slaughtered, and the Federation stands by because of a principle written centuries ago? I'll figure it out without becoming an assassin. Will you? Sloane pulled out a small data pad. 3 days ago, a pre-warp civilization on Corellia 4 was invaded by the Tellarian Republic. 8,000 dead in the first orbital bombardment. The survivors are being rounded up for slave labor. Starfleet knows. They've been monitoring the situation. And they're doing nothing because Corellia 4 hasn't achieved warp drive yet. Mark felt his stomach tighten. You're lying. Check the Enterprise's classified logs if you don't believe me. Captain Picard received the reports yesterday. He filed a formal objection to Starfleet Command, citing humanitarian concerns. They denied his request to intervene. 8,000 dead, Mr. Grayson. And counting. The Federation has rules. The Federation has principles that feel good in lecture halls but fail in the real world. Sloane interrupted. Section 31 exists because someone has to make the hard choices. Someone has to protect the Federation from threats that can't be negotiated with or reasoned with. Someone has to get their hands dirty so everyone else can keep their consciences clean. Mark pushed past her toward his quarters. I've heard this speech before. From my father. From every tyrant who justified conquest as protection. You're not protecting anyone. You're just looking for an excuse to do whatever you want without accountability. Sloane called after him. When you're ready to make a real difference, contact us. We'll be waiting. Mark entered his quarters and locked the door behind him, his heart pounding. He stood there for a moment, trying to process everything. Then he tapped his comm badge. Grayson to Captain Picard. We need to talk. Section 31 just made their pitch. And they told me something about a planet called Corellia 4. The silence on the other end lasted just long enough to confirm what Mark had feared. It was true. Picard's ready room felt smaller than before. The captain stood at his window, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the stars. Mark could see the tension in his shoulders, the weight of command that seemed to press down on him. Corellia 4 is real, Picard said quietly. The reports are accurate. 8,347 casualties in the initial attack. Current estimates suggest another 12,000 in captivity, forced into labor camps to extract the lithium from the planet's core. Mark felt his anger rising. And you're just letting it happen. I am following Starfleet regulations. Picard corrected, turning to face him. Regulations I disagree with, that I have formally protested, but that I am nevertheless bound to obey. The Corellians have not achieved warp capability. Direct intervention would violate the Prime Directive. The Prime Directive is wrong, Mark said flatly. If it tells you to stand by while thousands of people are enslaved and murdered, then it's a bad law and you shouldn't follow it. And what would you have me do? Picard's voice rose slightly, the first crack in his controlled demeanor. Violate my orders? Take the Enterprise to Corellia 4 and start a war with the Tellarian Republic? Risk the lives of my crew and potentially destabilize an entire sector of space over people's lives? Mark interrupted. That's what you were going to say, isn't it? You were going to minimize those 8,000 dead, call them acceptable losses for your precious principles. No. Picard's voice was sharp. I was going to say over a situation where I cannot see the full consequences of my actions. The Tellarian Republic is a minor power, yes, but they have alliances with other species. If the Federation intervenes militarily, it could trigger conflicts that kill millions. And if we establish a precedent of ignoring the Prime Directive whenever we find it inconvenient, we open the door to colonial interference that could destroy countless civilizations. Or save them. Perhaps. But who decides which civilizations deserve saving and which deserve to develop on their own? You? Me? Where does it end, Mr. Grayson? Picard moved closer, his eyes burning with an intensity that matched Mark's own. Once we start making those choices, Once we decide our judgment supersedes the rights of other species to determine their own fate, we become exactly what the Prime Directive was designed to prevent, an empire imposing its will on the galaxy. Mark's fists clenched. So those people on Corellia 4 just don't matter? They're acceptable sacrifices for your philosophy? They matter tremendously, Picard said, his voice dropping to something almost like anguish. Do you think I sleep well knowing what's happening there? That I don't hear their voices in my mind, asking why we abandoned them? But my personal feelings cannot dictate Federation policy. The needs of the many. Don't quote Spock at me, Mark snapped. I know that line. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. But what about when the few are being slaughtered and the many are just standing around debating ethics? Then we find another way, Picard insisted. We provide covert intelligence to the Corellian resistance. We station ships nearby to prevent further Talarian expansion. We apply diplomatic pressure through channels that don't require direct military intervention. We work within the system too. While people die. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Picard spoke, his voice weary. Yes. While people die. That is the burden of command, Mr. Grayson. Making impossible choices with incomplete information and living with the consequences. Section 31 told you about Corellia 4 because they knew it would inflame your heroic instincts. They want you angry, frustrated, convinced that the Federation's principles are obstacles rather than foundations. That's how they recruit. By finding people who care deeply about justice and twisting that care into justification for abandoning all ethical constraints. Maybe they're right to be frustrated, Mark said. Maybe your constraints cost more lives than they save. And maybe they save civilizations from becoming dependent on Federation intervention. Picard countered. Maybe they prevent us from becoming galactic overlords who decide which species deserve to exist, and which don't. These are not simple questions, and anyone who claims they are is either lying or hasn't thought deeply enough about the consequences. Mark turned away, staring at the model starships on Picard's shelf. Constitution class, Galaxy class, vessels of exploration that carried the weight of impossible decisions. In my universe, Mark said slowly, I watched my father justify conquest as protection. Watched him claim that humans needed Viltrumite rule because we were too chaotic, too violent, too primitive to govern ourselves. He believed it completely. Thought he was saving us. He looked back at Picard. So I get what you're saying about not becoming colonial overlords. I really do. But there's a difference between conquering people for their own good and defending them from conquest. Is there? Picard asked. Where is that line, precisely? The Corellians are being conquered by the Talarians. But to intervene, we would potentially be conquering the Talarians, using our superior force to impose our will on their sovereignty. Yes, our cause seems more just. But to them, we would be the aggressors, the empire that attacks without provocation. They provoked by enslaving innocent people. By our moral standards, yes. But the Talarian Republic has different cultural values. They view conquest as a legitimate expression of strength, and slavery as an acceptable institution for captured enemies. We find it abhorrent, but who are we to impose our morality on their civilization? Mark stared at Picard in disbelief. You can't seriously be defending slavery. I'm not defending anything, Picard said firmly. I'm explaining the complexity of the situation. The moment we start deciding which cultural practices are acceptable and which justify military intervention, we become arbiters of galactic morality. And history has shown, repeatedly, that such arbitration leads to imperialism. So you do nothing. So we work within diplomatic channels. We apply economic pressure. We offer the Corellians covert assistance to resist. We make it clear to the Talarians that further expansion will have consequences. Picard's voice hardened. What we don't do is send you to Corellia 4 to single-handedly dismantle their occupation. Because while that might save those 12,000 people in the short term, it would also announce to the galaxy that the Federation possesses a weapon capable of defeating armies without authorization or oversight. And then what? How many species immediately see you as a threat? How many alliances crumble because our allies fear we'll use you against them if they step out of line? Mark hadn't thought about it that way. About how his intervention might be perceived by others who didn't know him, didn't trust him, saw only an unstoppable force operating at the Federation's direction. I wouldn't be acting for the Federation, he said. I'd be acting on my own. Would you? You're aboard a Federation starship, accepting Federation hospitality while we work to return you to your dimension. Any action you take will be seen as having tacit Federation approval. You cannot separate yourself from that association simply by claiming independence. The door chimed. Picard called. Come. Data entered, his expression as neutral as ever but with something urgent in his bearing. Captain, we have identified the source of the Section 31 transmission. Lieutenant Reese in engineering has been placed in the brig. However, before we could interrogate her, she ingested a neurotoxin. Dr. Crusher is attempting to stabilize her, but the prognosis is poor. A suicide pill, Picard said grimly. Section 31 standard protocol when operatives are compromised. They're thorough, I'll give them that. There is more, sir. Data continued. Before losing consciousness, Lieutenant Reese transmitted a final message. It was directed to Mr. Grayson. He handed over a PDD. Mark took it, reading the text displayed. Corellia 4 coordinates attached. A shuttle is prepped in Bay 3, shielded from sensors. You could be there in 6 hours. Save them. Prove the Federation wrong. Show them what real heroism looks like. Or stay on this ship and let your principles matter more than people's lives. The choice is yours. Section 31. Mark looked up at Picard. The captain's face was unreadable. They've made their play, Picard said quietly. Presented you with a choice designed to seem simple. Save the innocent, or obey unjust rules. They've even provided the means, a shuttle, coordinates, everything you need to act. And if I go? Then you prove Section 31 right. That principles are obstacles, that ends justify means, that individual judgment supersedes collective wisdom. You become exactly the kind of weapon they want, powerful, unaccountable, and convinced of your own righteousness. And if I don't go? Then 12,000 people remain enslaved while you debate ethics aboard a starship. Picard met his eyes. There is no good answer here, Mr. Grayson. Only consequences you'll have to live with either way. Mark looked down at the PDD, at the coordinates glowing on the screen. 6 hours to Corellia 4. 6 hours to make a difference, to be the hero he'd always been. Or 6 hours to become the kind of person his father had been, convinced his power gave him the right to decide for others. What would you do? Mark asked. If you had my power, if you weren't bound by Starfleet, if you could save those people, what would you do? Picard was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of every impossible decision he'd ever made. I don't know, he admitted. And that's the terrifying truth, Mr. Grayson. I genuinely don't know. Which is why I'm grateful I'll never have to make that choice. But you do. Mark stood in the corridor outside Shuttle Bay 3, the PDD heavy in his hand. Through the transparent aluminum viewport, he could see the Type 6 shuttle sitting ready, its warp nacelles already glowing with pre-flight initialization. Section 31 had been thorough. Everything was prepared for him to become their hero. Or their puppet. He thought about those 12,000 people on Corellia 4. Imagine them in labor camps, breaking their bodies to mine dilithium for their captors. Children separated from parents. The wounded left to die. All while the most powerful civilization in this quadrant watched and did nothing. His father would have called it weakness. Would have said that power demanded action, that standing by was cowardice dressed up as principle. But his father had also believed that Earth needed to be conquered. That humans were too chaotic to govern themselves. That Viltrumite rule was mercy. The shuttle bay doors could be opened with a thought. His strength could tear through the bulkheads if necessary. Nothing physical could stop him from leaving. But Picard's words echoed in his mind. You cannot separate yourself from that association simply by claiming independence. Mark had spent years fighting to be more than his Viltrumite heritage. To prove that power didn't have to mean domination, that strength could serve rather than rule. And now Section 31 was offering him the same temptation his father had embraced. The certainty that he knew better, that his judgment was superior, that his power justified making choices for others. The difference was supposed to be that Mark was saving people, not conquering them. But was there a difference? If he went to Corellia 4, destroyed the Talarian occupation forces, freed the prisoners, would they have chosen him as their savior? Or would he just be imposing his will on their planet, deciding their fate because he had the power to do so? Having second thoughts? Mark turned. Commander Riker stood a few meters away, arms crossed, expression carefully neutral. Captain Picard sent you to stop me? No. He sent me to talk to you. There's a difference. Riker moved closer to the viewport, studying the shuttle. Section 31 is good at what they do. They've manipulated better people than you into doing terrible things for good reasons. What if they're right this time? Mark asked. What if this is a situation where action is better than principle? Maybe it is, Riker admitted. Hell, I've had moments where I questioned the Prime Directive myself. Times when standing by felt like betrayal. But here's what I learned. The easy choice and the right choice are rarely the same thing. Saving people is easy? Saving people you can see, right in front of you? Yes. It's the easiest thing in the world. Your power makes it even easier. You could probably liberate that entire planet in a few hours. But what about the people you can't see? The consequences 3 moves down the board? Riker turned to face him. If you attack the Talarian occupation, they'll retaliate. Maybe not at Corellia 4, but somewhere. Another Federation colony, another pre-warp civilization. And they'll be justified in calling it self-defense against Federation aggression. I'm not the Federation. You think the Talarians will care about that distinction? You think the Romulan Star Empire won't use your intervention as evidence that the Federation deploys superweapons while pretending to value peace? Riker's voice hardened. Section 31 knows all this. They're counting on it. They want you to destabilize the region so they can swoop in with their solutions, their methods, their vision of how the galaxy should work. Mark's grip tightened on the PDD. So I should just do nothing? Let those people suffer because I'm worried about political consequences? No. You should think beyond the immediate problem. You should ask yourself whether being a hero means making the hard choice or the satisfying one. Riker paused. When I was younger, I would have said go. Save them. Damn the consequences. But I've learned that consequences matter. That good intentions without wisdom create disasters. Wisdom, Mark repeated bitterly. Everyone keeps talking about wisdom like it's some answer. But wisdom without action is just cowardice with a philosophy degree. Sometimes, Riker agreed. And sometimes action without wisdom is just violence with good PR. They stood in silence, watching the shuttle through the viewport. Captain Picard asked me what I would do if I had your power, Mark said finally. Said he didn't know? Do you? Riker considered the question. Yeah. I'd probably go. I'd save those people, deal with the fallout later, and tell myself I did the right thing. But that's why I'm a commander and Picard's a captain. He understands something I'm still learning, that being in command means living with the people you couldn't save so you can save the ones who come after. That's cold. It's necessary. The galaxy is bigger than any one crisis, Mark. If you burn down the future to save the present, you haven't saved anything. You've just delayed the collapse. Mark looked down at the PDD one last time, at the coordinates glowing there like a promise. Or a trap. He made his decision. His hand clenched, crushing the PADD into fragments of plastic and circuitry. The coordinates disappeared in a shower of sparks. I'm not going, he said quietly. Not because I think you're right. Not because I agree with the Prime Directive or Federation policy or any of this, but because I'm not going to let Section 31 turn me into their weapon. I've been used before. Never again. Riker nodded slowly. That's probably the wisest thing I've heard since you came aboard. It doesn't feel wise. It feels like I'm abandoning people who need help. Yeah. It does. Riker's expression held genuine sympathy. Welcome to command, even if you're not in Starfleet. That feeling never really goes away. They walked together away from Shuttle Bay 3, leaving the prepared shuttle sitting empty. As they approached the turbolift, Mark stopped. Commander, what's going to happen to those people on Corellia 4? If I don't go, if the Federation doesn't intervene, what's their future? Riker's jaw tightened. I don't know. Maybe the Resistance will succeed. Maybe the Talarians will eventually withdraw. Maybe Starfleet Command will find a way to justify intervention. Or maybe they'll suffer and die and become another footnote in a history that no one remembers. He met Mark's eyes. The universe isn't fair, Mark. It doesn't care about our principles or our pain. All we can do is try to make choices that do the least harm in the long run. That's not heroism. That's just damage control. Sometimes that's all heroism can be. They entered the turbolift. As the doors closed, Mark caught one last glimpse of the shuttle bay, of the escape that Section 31 had prepared for him. He'd made his choice. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like failure wrapped in philosophy. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, on a planet called Corellia 4, 12,000 people continued to suffer while the galaxy's heroes debated the ethics of saving them. The question that would haunt Mark for the rest of his time in this universe was simple. Had he just learned wisdom? Or had he just learned how to rationalize cowardice? The turbolift doors opened onto Deck 8. Mark walked toward his quarters alone, the weight of his decision pressing down on him like gravity. In his own universe, the answer would have been clear. Here, nothing was clear at all. And that, he was beginning to understand, was exactly the point. The transporter room hummed with energy as Mark materialized in space, the Enterprise's hull stretching behind him like a protective barrier. The Borg cube loomed ahead, a monument to cold efficiency and relentless conquest. For a moment, he simply floated there, letting his Viltrumite physiology fully acclimate to the vacuum. His body didn't need air. His cells could survive indefinitely without it. The cold didn't touch him. The radiation that would kill a human in seconds washed over him harmlessly. The Borg cube's surface rippled with activity. Sensors scanning him. Analyzing. Categorizing. Then they fired. Green cutting beams lanced out, each one capable of slicing through starship hulls. Mark didn't dodge. He let them hit him, felt the energy wash over his skin like warm water. The beams intensified, focusing their power, trying to cut through his cellular density. It didn't work. Adaptation unsuccessful. He imagined them calculating. Increasing power. More beams joined the first. A dozen. 20. The space around him became a lattice of emerald death that would have vaporized anything else in seconds. Mark flew forward. The Borg cube tried to adjust, to recalibrate, to adapt. But how do you adapt to something that simply doesn't care about your weapons? Mark crashed into the hull with the force of a photon torpedo, his fist driving through the metallic surface like it was paper. Inside the cube, drones turned to face him. Humanoid figures wrapped in technology, their faces half organic, half machine. They moved with perfect coordination, attempting to swarm him, inject him with assimilation nanoprobes. The first drone that reached him grabbed his arm. Mark felt the sting of injection. Millions of microscopic machines flooding into his bloodstream. The Borg's greatest weapon, technology that rewrote biology from within, transforming victims into more drones. For 3 seconds, the nanoprobes tried to interface with his Viltrumite cells. Then his immune system recognized them as foreign objects, and destroyed them. Every single one. That's the thing about Viltrumite biology. Mark said to the drones surrounding him, knowing they'd share the information with their collective consciousness. "We've evolved to survive everything. Including you." He moved. Borg drones were strong, fast, adaptable. But they were still fundamentally limited by the bodies they inhabited. Mark wasn't. He tore through them like a storm, not killing. He wasn't here to commit genocide, but disabling. Ripping away mechanical components. Smashing power conduits. Creating chaos in a system built on perfect order. The cube's interior was a maze of corridors, all identical, all designed for maximum efficiency. Mark flew through them, following the strongest power signatures toward the cube's central processing core. Behind him, damaged drones attempted to regenerate, to adapt, to counter his assault. But there was nothing to adapt to. He was simply too strong, too durable, too fast for their protocols. The central chamber opened before him, a massive sphere of processing nodes where thousands of drones interfaced with the collective consciousness. At its center, suspended in green light, was a Borg queen. Mark had heard about them from Data's briefing. The nexus point of the collective, the closest thing the Borg had to an individual leader. She regarded him with eyes that held both mechanical precision and something disturbingly organic. "You are invincible," she said, her voice echoing through the chamber and somehow inside his mind. "We have assimilated your designation from the Enterprise's database. You resist assimilation. This is unexpected." "Yeah, well, I'm full of surprises." Mark floated closer, keeping his distance but radiating confidence. "Here's how this is going to work. You're going to leave Federation space. You're going to forget about assimilating me. And you're going to spread the word through your collective that I'm off limits. Unacceptable. Your biological distinctiveness would enhance the perfection of the collective. We will find a way to adapt. You won't." Mark let power radiate from him, let his cells generate enough energy that the air itself began to glow. "Because I can destroy this cube. Right now. I can tear it apart from the inside, kill every drone, end this collective node's existence. Or you can leave peacefully and we both survive." The Queen's head tilted, processing. "You hesitate. The Enterprise crew has infected you with their weakness. Their compassion. You could destroy us but choose not to. This is inefficient. It's called mercy. You should try it sometime. Mercy is irrelevant. Compassion is irrelevant. Only the perfection of the collective." Mark moved faster than the Queen's sensors could track, closing the distance between them in a heartbeat. His hand closed around the mechanical implants at her throat, not squeezing, just holding. A promise of what he could do. "I don't want to kill you," he said quietly. "I don't want to destroy this cube and everyone in it. But I will if you force me to. Because unlike you, I've learned something in the last day. Sometimes the right choice isn't the satisfying one. Sometimes you have to make the hard call." He met her eyes, organic and synthetic merged into something neither fully alive nor fully machine. "So I'm giving you a choice. Leave or I end you. Not because I want to. Because I have to." The Queen's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the chamber. The drones stopped advancing. The collective consciousness was recalculating, analyzing, determining probabilities. "You would sacrifice efficiency for principle," the Queen said. "This is the Federation weakness we have observed. It's not weakness. It's what makes us more than you'll ever be." Mark released her, floating back. "You want perfection through assimilation. But real perfection comes from diversity. From choice. From being strong enough to show mercy when you could show force." For a long moment, the chamber was silent except for the hum of Borg technology. Then the Queen spoke, her voice carrying across the collective. "This encounter has provided valuable data. The biological entity designated Invincible represents an anomaly requiring further study. We will withdraw. For now." The cube began to power down its weapons. Mark felt the shift in the massive vessel's energy signature as it prepared to open another trans-warp conduit. We will encounter you again, Invincible, the Queen said. And when we do, we will have adapted. Looking forward to it, Mark replied, though he wasn't sure he meant it. He flew back through the corridors, past regenerating drones, past damaged systems already beginning self-repair. The Borg were nothing if not efficient. As he exited through the hole he'd created in the hull, he saw the transwarp conduit forming, a spiral of green energy that would carry the cube light years away in seconds. The Enterprise hung nearby, her shields still up, weapons charged but not firing. Mark flew toward her, letting the transporter beam catch him and pull him back inside. The bridge erupted in controlled celebration as he materialized. Even Worf looked impressed. Picard approached, his expression complex, relief mixed with something else. Pride, maybe? Or concern. Mr. Grayson, your performance was remarkable. You've given the Federation valuable intelligence about Borg vulnerabilities. And you may have prevented an assimilation scenario that could have cost countless lives. But, Mark heard the unspoken word. But you also demonstrated to the Borg that beings of your power level exist. They will adapt their tactics accordingly. They will seek you out. And they will find ways to counter you that we cannot yet imagine. Mark nodded slowly. Damned if I do, damned if I don't. Story of my life in this universe. Not damned, Picard corrected gently. Simply facing the consequences of your choices. Which is what we all must do. He extended his hand. You showed restraint when you could have shown destruction. You chose mercy when vengeance would have been easier. That is the mark of true strength, Mr. Grayson. Mark shook his hand, feeling the weight of everything that had happened since arriving in this strange universe. The choices he'd made. The ones he hadn't. The people he'd saved and the ones he'd left behind. Captain, Data announced, I have completed my analysis of the subspace rupture that brought Mr. Grayson to our dimension. I believe I can recreate the phenomenon using our main deflector array. Everyone on the bridge turned to look at Mark. This was it. The chance to go home. Back to his Earth. His team. His purpose. Away from impossible choices and philosophical debates about when to act and when to stand aside. How soon can you do it? Mark asked. Within the hour, if we divert sufficient power to the deflector array. Mark looked around the bridge. At Picard, who challenged everything he thought he knew about heroism. At Worf, who'd shown him that honor came in many forms. At Data, Riker, Troy, all of them representing a vision of the future he'd never imagined. Do it, Mark said finally. Get me home. The main deflector array pulsed with energy, warping space in patterns that defied conventional physics. Mark stood in the shuttle bay, not the one Section 31 had prepared, but Bay 1, official and observed by the crew that had become something like friends over the past 36 hours. Picard stood beside him, hands clasped behind his back in that characteristic pose. You're certain about this? We could continue trying to understand your abilities, perhaps find a way for you to. I need to go home. Mark interrupted gently. My Earth has problems too. People who need help. A team that's probably wondering if I'm dead. He paused. And honestly, Captain, I don't know if I'm ready for this universe. The complexity of it. The weight of every decision. No one is ever ready, Picard said. We simply do our best and hope wisdom comes with experience. He turned to face Mark directly. You asked me what I would do if I had your power. I've thought about it more since then. The answer is, I would hope to have someone like myself to remind me that power without wisdom is simply force. And force, no matter how well-intentioned, creates as many problems as it solves. I'll try to remember that, Mark said. When I get back and someone asks why I didn't just punch the problem until it stopped being a problem. A crude but effective summary of the dilemma. Picard smiled slightly. Mr. Grayson, Mark, you came here by accident, but I don't think your time in our universe was wasted. You've learned something about restraint. About the cost of intervention. Those are valuable lessons for someone with your capabilities. Mark thought about Corellia 4. About the 12,000 people still suffering while he flew home to his own problems. The guilt would stay with him. But so would the understanding that not every problem could be solved with strength. What will happen to them? He asked quietly. The Corellians? Picard's expression sobered. I don't know. Perhaps the Resistance will succeed. Perhaps Starfleet will find a justification for intervention. Perhaps they will suffer and endure and eventually free themselves, stronger for having done so without outside help. He met Mark's eyes. Or perhaps they will fail, and their tragedy will be added to the countless others in the galaxy. I wish I could promise a happy ending. But the universe doesn't work that way. No, Mark agreed. It doesn't. Data's voice came over the comm system. Captain, the deflector array is at maximum power. The subspace rupture is forming. Mr. Grayson should proceed to the coordinates within the next 90 seconds. Mark looked out the shuttle bay's atmospheric force field at the tear in space forming outside, the same impossible colors, the same wrongness that had marked his arrival. His way home. One last thing, Picard said. When you return to your Earth, you'll face similar dilemmas. Situations where your power could solve problems but might create others. Times when action and restraint are both wrong and both right. What will you do? Mark considered the question. 24 hours ago, he would have had an immediate answer. Now, standing on the edge of two universes, he wasn't so sure. I'll try to be better, he said finally. To think beyond the immediate problem. To consider consequences. To ask myself whether I'm helping or just satisfying my own need to feel useful. He smiled ruefully. But I'll probably still punch a lot of bad guys. Some habits are hard to break. Some habits shouldn't be broken, Picard replied. The instinct to protect, to defend, to stand against injustice, these are noble. Just temper them with thought. With understanding that the galaxy is complex and your vision is limited. 60 seconds, Data announced. Mark extended his hand. Picard shook it firmly. Live long and prosper, Captain. And you, Mr. Grayson. May you find your way in your own universe as you struggled to find it in ours. Mark turned and flew through the atmospheric force field, his body immediately adjusting to the vacuum of space. Behind him, the Enterprise hung in space, a symbol of everything he'd learned, everything he'd struggled with, everything he still didn't fully understand about this universe's approach to heroism. The subspace rupture pulsed before him, reality folding in on itself in ways that hurt to look at. Mark took a breath he didn't need, gathered his strength, and flew toward it. The transition was violent, worse than his arrival. Dimensional barriers tore at him, forces that would have destroyed any normal being pulling him through layers of reality that shouldn't exist. He held together through sheer Viltrumite durability, his cells adapting, surviving, refusing to be torn apart. And then he was through. The stars were different. Familiar. His stars. Earth's stars. Mark oriented himself, saw the blue-green planet he'd fought so hard to protect, and felt relief wash over him like a wave. He was home. But as he flew toward Earth, toward his team and his life and his familiar problems, Picard's words echoed in his mind. Power without wisdom is simply force. And force, no matter how well-intentioned, creates as many problems as it solves. Mark didn't know if he agreed. Didn't know if the Federation's principles would work in his universe, where threats were more immediate and villains rarely sat down for diplomatic negotiations. But he understood now that the question mattered. That asking whether he should act was as important as asking whether he could. In the Star Trek universe, he'd been challenged in ways no villain had ever challenged him. Not physically, the Borg had been tough, but manageable. No, he'd been challenged philosophically. Morally. Asked to consider whether being a hero meant more than just being strong enough to win fights. He still didn't have all the answers. Maybe he never would. But as Mark Grayson descended through Earth's atmosphere, heading toward a team that would want explanations and a world that still needed protecting, he carried with him something he hadn't had before. Doubt. Not about his abilities. Not about his commitment to protecting people. But about whether protection always meant intervention. Whether strength always meant action. Whether heroism could sometimes look like restraint. The questions would haunt him. Challenge him. Force him to think before he acted, to consider consequences before he threw punches. And in the end, maybe that was what the Star Trek universe had given him. Not answers, but better questions. Live long and prosper. Hit the subscribe button for more interesting stories. Thank you for watching.